The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of Casabella, casting golden streaks across the polished wooden floors. Robert Chun stood behind the bar, methodically wiping down the mahogany surface with a clean white cloth. It was that peaceful time between lunch and dinner when the restaurant breathed a little easier. Most of the tables were empty now, just a few lingering customers finishing their coffee and dessert. Robert had owned this restaurant for 8 years. Every day brought its own rhythm, its own small dramas. But today was different, though he didn't know it yet. The front door swung open, and Robert glanced up out of habit. A man stepped inside, and immediately the atmosphere shifted. He looked to be in his late 50s, maybe early 60s. His clothes were wrinkled and stained, layers that didn't match the warm July weather outside. A heavy coat hung from his thin shoulders, and his gray hair stuck out in uneven tufts beneath a worn baseball cap. His face was covered with an unkempt beard, weathered and deeply lined. Vincent, the young host who usually greeted customers with a bright smile, froze. His hand moved instinctively toward the phone at his podium. Robert had seen this reaction before. In an upscale neighborhood like theirs, homeless people wandering in wasn't uncommon, usually looking for a bathroom or hoping someone might spare some cash. But this man didn't shuffle or avoid eye contact like most did. He walked with his back straight, almost dignified despite his appearance. His eyes swept across the restaurant, taking in the white tablecloths, the oil paintings on the walls, the crystal light fixtures. Then his gaze settled on something in the corner, the piano. Robert followed his line of sight. The baby grand piano sat there like it did every day, its black lacquer surface gleaming under the soft lights. He'd bought it 2 years ago at an estate sale, thinking it would add elegance to the dining room. And it did, in a way. Customers often commented on it, took photos next to it. But it was just decoration. Nobody ever played it. Robert himself couldn't play a note. A man started walking toward Vincent's podium. A couple at a nearby table noticed him, their conversation dropping to whispers. The wife clutched her purse a little tighter. Robert saw Vincent's jaw tense, preparing to politely but firmly ask the man to leave. Then the stranger spoke. His voice was rough, like gravel, but there was something measured about it. Careful. I'll play piano for a meal. The words hung in the air. Vincent blinked, confused. A businessman in a gray suit turned in his chair to stare. In the kitchen, Robert could hear the clatter of dishes, the sizzle of something on the stove, completely unaware of what was happening out front. The man pointed toward the piano in the corner. I can play, he said again, a little louder this time. Just for something to eat. Anything. I'm not picky. Robert stepped out from behind the bar. His chef's jacket was unbuttoned at the collar, his sleeves rolled up from the lunch rush. He'd been in the restaurant business long enough to handle all kinds of situations. Drunk customers, angry customers, people trying to skip out on their bills. But this was new. He walked closer, studying the man's face. Beneath the beard and the dirt, there was something in his eyes. Not aggression or desperation exactly, but a quiet kind of pain. The man's hands trembled slightly at his sides. Robert noticed his fingernails, surprisingly clean despite everything else, trimmed short. You play piano? Robert asked, keeping his voice neutral. The man nodded. Yes, sir. Been playing my whole life. Vincent shot Robert a look that said, Please don't do this. The couple at the table were openly staring now. Robert could feel the weight of their judgment, could imagine what they were thinking. This was a nice restaurant. They paid good money to eat here. They didn't come here to watch some homeless person get a handout. Robert's wife, Linda, had talked to him about this kind of thing before. You're too soft, she'd say, not meanly, but with concern. You can't save everyone who walks through that door. And she was right, in a way. Robert had given money to people before, bought meals for folks who looked hungry. But this felt different. What kind of music do you play? Robert asked. The man's shoulders relaxed just slightly, like he hadn't expected anyone to actually engage with him. Classical, mostly. Some jazz, whatever you'd want. Robert glanced at the piano again. He'd never even had it tuned. For all he knew, half the keys didn't work. This could be a disaster. The man could sit down and pound out some terrible noise, upset the remaining customers, create a scene. Vincent was probably right to be skeptical. But something in Robert's chest pulled at him. Maybe it was the way the man stood there, not begging, not making excuses, just offering something in exchange for food. There was dignity in that. A trade, not charity. All right, Robert heard himself say. Vincent's eyes went wide. You can play. The man's expression didn't change much, but Robert saw his throat work as he swallowed. Thank you, he said quietly. Robert gestured toward the piano. Go ahead. The man walked across the restaurant, weaving between empty tables. Every eye in the room followed him. The businessman had set down his fork entirely. A young woman in the corner pulled out her phone, probably ready to record whatever was about to happen. When the man reached the piano, he stood there for a long moment, just looking at it. His trembling hand reached out and touched the polished surface, fingers trailing across it like he was greeting an old friend. Then he carefully removed his heavy coat, folding it and placing it on the floor beside the bench. Robert noticed the shirt underneath was thin and faded, but it had been a nice shirt once. Oxford cloth, button-down collar. The kind of thing a professional might wear. The man sat down on the bench slowly, adjusting his position. He lifted the key cover with both hands, revealing the ivory and black keys beneath. For a moment, he just sat there, his dirty hands hovering above them, not quite touching. The entire restaurant had gone silent. Even the kitchen noise seemed to fade. Robert stood by the bar, arms crossed, waiting. Part of him still wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. But it was too late now. Then the man's fingers descended onto the keys, and everything changed. The first notes that came from the piano were soft, almost hesitant. The man's fingers touched the keys like he was testing them, making sure they were real. Robert watched from his spot by the bar, holding his breath without realizing it. Then the music began. Robert didn't know much about classical music. He couldn't have named the piece if his life depended on it, but he knew beauty when he heard it. The melody that filled the restaurant was delicate and haunting, each note flowing into the next like water over smooth stones. The man's hands moved across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible given how they'd been shaking just moments before. In the heart of the city, at a cozy little restaurant called the Melodic Spoon, a story unfolded that would change two lives forever. It was a chilly evening, and the restaurant was bustling with the usual dinner crowd. The owner, a kind-hearted woman named Clara, moved between tables, ensuring her guests were happy. Suddenly, the front door creaked open, letting in a gust of cold air. Standing in the doorway was a man. His clothes were worn, and his face was etched with the hardships of life on the streets. He clutched a tattered bag, his eyes scanning the warm room with a mix of desperation and hope. Some diners looked away, uncomfortable. Others whispered amongst themselves. The man, whose name was Arthur, approached Clara, not with his hand out for money, but with a simple, quiet request. "Ma'am," he said, his voice raspy, "I don't have any money, but I saw you have a piano. If you'd let me play a song, perhaps I could earn a warm meal?" Clara looked at the old piano tucked away in the corner. It hadn't been played in years, ever since her father, the original owner, had passed away. It was more of a sentimental piece of furniture now. She hesitated for a moment, then looked into Arthur's sincere eyes and saw not a beggar, but a man with a story. "All right," she agreed, a small smile on her face. One song. A hush fell over the restaurant as Arthur walked to the piano. He gently placed his bag on the floor and sat down on the dusty stool. He wiped his hands on his trousers, took a deep breath, and then, His fingers touched the keys. What happened next was pure magic. The first few notes were soft, hesitant, like a shy whisper. But then the melody began to flow. It was a sound so beautiful, so full of emotion, it seemed to fill every corner of the room. It was a song of longing, of lost memories, of heartache, but also of a resilient hope that refused to be extinguished. Every single person in the restaurant stopped what they were doing. Forks were put down. Conversations died away. All eyes were on Arthur, this stranger who was pouring his entire soul into the old, forgotten piano. The music swelled, telling a story without words. You could almost see the life he had lived, the sunny days, the stormy nights, the moments of joy, and the years of struggle. His fingers, though calloused and rough, danced across the keys with a grace and skill that spoke of years of practice, of a deep, abiding love for the instrument. He closed his eyes, lost in his own world, the music a living, breathing entity that connected him to everyone in the room. Clara stood frozen behind the counter, tears welling up in her eyes. The song. She knew this song. It was a melody her father used to play, a tune he had composed himself but never wrote down. It was a secret melody shared only between father and daughter, a lullaby from her childhood. How could this stranger possibly know it? It felt like her father was speaking to her through the music, across time and space. When the final note faded into silence, the restaurant was completely still for a beat. And then the room erupted. It wasn't just polite applause. It was a standing ovation. People were cheering. Some were crying. They were moved not just by the skill, but by the raw, honest emotion of the performance. Arthur opened his eyes, looking slightly bewildered by the reaction. He simply nodded, a humble acknowledgement of the applause. As the noise subsided, Clara walked over to him, her heart pounding. Where did you learn that song?" she asked, her voice trembling. Arthur looked up at her, a faint, sad smile on his face. "A long time ago," he began softly, "I used to be a concert pianist. I had a mentor, a dear friend who owned a small restaurant. He believed in me when no one else did. He wrote that piece for his daughter. He always said it was his greatest composition." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She looked at Arthur, really looked at him, and saw a glimmer of the young, hopeful musician he once was. "My father. His name was Joseph," she whispered. Arthur's eyes widened in disbelief. "Joseph? The owner of the melodic spoon? He was my best friend. He gave me my first chance. I lost touch with everyone after life took a different turn. In that moment, everything clicked into place. This wasn't just a homeless man. This was Arthur, her father's protege, the brilliant young pianist he had always talked about with such pride. The world had been cruel to him, but it hadn't taken away his gift. Clara knelt beside him, taking his rough hands in hers. "Arthur," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "you don't need to play for your meal. You're home." From that day on, the melodic spoon had a new resident pianist. Arthur was given a room upstairs, a new set of clothes, and a permanent place at the piano. The restaurant became more popular than ever, with people coming from all over the city, not just for the food, but to hear the man whose music could touch the soul. Arthur, in turn, found not just a home, but a family. He regained his dignity and his purpose. The old piano was no longer a dusty memory, but a vibrant symbol of second chances, a testament to the fact that kindness is a melody everyone can understand, and that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most unexpected places. Thanks for watching our story today. If it touched your heart, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more content that inspires. See you next time. Jenny brought water first, setting the glasses down gently. If she was bothered by Thomas's appearance, she didn't show it. "That was amazing," she told him with a genuine smile. "I got chills." Thomas nodded, still seeming overwhelmed. He drank the water like he'd been walking through a desert, draining half the glass in one long gulp. Robert waited until Jenny left before speaking. So how does someone who plays like that end up? He trailed off, not sure how to finish the sentence politely. On the streets? Thomas finished for him. His voice was rough but educated. You could hear it in the way he shaped his words. It's a fair question. He set down his water glass and looked at it for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. I wasn't always like this. I had a life once. A real one. Robert said nothing, just listened. I studied at Juilliard, Thomas continued, the words coming slowly, like they hurt to say. Got a full scholarship when I was 18. Performed all over. New York, Boston, Chicago. Even did a tour in Europe when I was in my 30s. Vienna, Paris, London. He smiled slightly, but there was no joy in it. I played in halls where Mozart himself once performed. Can you imagine that? Robert couldn't, actually. That world seemed impossibly far from his restaurant, from his own life. What happened? Thomas's face changed. Something closed off behind his eyes. I had a wife, Catherine, and a daughter, Amy. She was 7. He stopped, his jaw working. 15 years ago, they went to visit Catherine's mother in Connecticut. I was supposed to go with them, but I had a performance that weekend. Important one, or so I thought. Robert felt his stomach drop. He knew where this was going. There was an accident, Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper now. Ice on the road. A truck crossed the median. He stopped, pressing his lips together hard. They didn't make it. Either of them. God, I'm sorry, Robert said, and the words felt completely inadequate. Thomas nodded, accepting the sympathy, but clearly not wanting to dwell on it. I fell apart after that. Completely. I couldn't play anymore. Every time I sat at a piano, all I could think about was that I'd chosen it over them. That if I'd just gone with them, instead of staying for that stupid concert. He trailed off, shaking his head. Started drinking. A lot. Missed performances, showed up drunk to others. Burned every bridge I had in the classical music world within 2 years. Lost my apartment, lost my friends, lost everything. Jenny returned with food. Plates of pasta with marinara sauce, a basket of warm bread, a fresh salad. The smell was incredible. Thomas stared at it all, like he was seeing a mirage. Eat, Robert said gently. We can talk while you eat. Thomas picked up his fork with shaking hands. The first bite went in slowly, but then hunger took over. He ate like someone who hadn't had a real meal in days. Probably because he hadn't. Robert let him eat for a while before asking the next question. How long have you been homeless? Thomas swallowed, took a drink of water. 12 years. Give or take. I lost count after a while. And you've been playing piano on the streets? Sometimes, Thomas said. There's a church that lets me use their piano on Tuesday mornings. St. Anthony's, over on Maple Street. The priest there, Father Miguel, he's a good man. Doesn't ask questions, just lets me play. He took another bite. That's the only time I touch a piano these days. Or it was, until today. Why did you come in here? Robert asked. Thomas looked up at him. Honestly, I was hungry. Really hungry. I've walked past this place 100 times, seen that piano through the window. Today something just made me think, maybe, just maybe. Robert leaned back in his seat, processing everything. A Juilliard graduate. A concert pianist who'd performed across the world. And now he was living on the streets, playing for a plate of pasta. Do you still drink? Robert asked bluntly. Thomas met his eyes. Yeah, not as much as I used to. Can't afford to, mostly. But yeah, I still do. At least he was honest. Robert appreciated that. Can I ask you something? Thomas said, setting down his fork. Why'd you let me play? Most places would have had someone throw me out before I got 3 words in. Robert thought about it. My father, he said finally. He had a restaurant back in Beijing. Small place, nothing fancy. He made some bad choices, got into gambling, lost everything. He rubbed his jaw, remembering. We came here with nothing. Literally nothing. I was 12, didn't speak a word of English. How'd you end up here? Thomas asked, gesturing around at the restaurant. A man named Mr. Peterson gave my father a job washing dishes at his diner. Terrible pay. Hard work. But it was a chance. My dad worked there for 8 years, saved every penny. Mr. Peterson taught him the business, helped him understand how things worked here. Robert smiled at the memory. When Mr. Peterson retired, he sold the diner to my dad for half what it was worth. Said my father had earned it. So you grew up in the restaurant business, Thomas said. Lived and breathed it. Worked every position there is. By the time I was 25, I knew I wanted my own place. Took another 10 years to make it happen, but here we are. He looked around his restaurant with pride. My father died 5 years ago, but he got to see this place. Got to see that his sacrifice meant something. Thomas nodded slowly, understanding. So you're paying it forward. Something like that, Robert agreed. Look, I've been thinking about what you said about only playing on Tuesdays at that church. Yeah? Robert took a breath. This was crazy. His wife was going to kill him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was important. What if you played here? During dinner service. 5 nights a week. Thomas's fork clattered onto his plate. What? I'll pay you. Not a fortune, but enough. Meals included. And I'll help you find a place to stay. Something stable. Thomas was shaking his head before Robert finished. No, you can't. You don't understand. I'm not reliable. I'm not the guy you think I am. You just played one of the most beautiful pieces of music I've ever heard, Robert said firmly. Today, yeah, but tomorrow? Next week? Thomas's voice rose slightly. I told you, I still drink. I sleep in doorways. I haven't been responsible for anything in 12 years. You'd be making a huge mistake. Robert leaned forward. Mr. Peterson took a chance on my father when everyone said he was a bad investment. A gambler, they said. Can't trust him. But Mr. Peterson saw something else. He saw a man who needed a second chance. That's different, Thomas protested. How? Your father wanted to change. I'm not sure I even can anymore. But do you want to? Robert asked quietly. The question hung in the air. Thomas looked down at his half-finished plate, at the warm food, at the clean napkin beside it. Small things that most people never thought twice about. His eyes were wet again. I don't know if I deserve to, he finally said. That's not what I asked. Thomas was quiet for a long time. Finally, he looked up. Yeah, he whispered. God help me. Yeah, I want to. Robert nodded. Then try, just try, 1 week. If it doesn't work out, no hard feelings. But give it a week. Thomas stared at him like he was looking at an alien. Why would you do this? Because someone did it for my family, Robert said simply. And because about 20 minutes ago, I watched you make a whole room full of strangers stop and feel something real. That matters. Thomas's hands were shaking worse than ever. He wiped his eyes roughly. 1 week? 1 week, Robert confirmed. After what felt like forever, Thomas gave a small nod. Okay, I'll try. Robert got home late that night, well after 10. His wife Linda was in the living room, reading a book with her feet tucked under her on the couch. She looked up when he came in and immediately knew something was different. What happened? She asked, setting the book aside. Robert sat down heavily in the armchair across from her. I did something today. Something you're probably going to think is crazy. Linda raised an eyebrow. 23 years of marriage meant she'd heard that line before. How crazy are we talking? He told her everything. About Thomas walking in, the offer to play for food, the performance that had stopped the whole restaurant, the conversation afterward, and finally, about the job offer. Linda listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Robert," she said carefully, "I know you have a good heart. It's one of the reasons I love you. But this man is homeless. He's an alcoholic. You don't really know him." "I know he can play piano like nobody I've ever heard," Robert said. "And I know he needs help." "Lots of people need help," Linda countered gently. "You can't save everyone. What if he steals from the restaurant? What if he shows up drunk? What if he just disappears after a few days?" "Then I'll have tried," Robert said. "And maybe that's enough." Linda studied his face, seeing the determination there. She sighed. "1 week? 1 week. That's all I promised him." She shook her head, but she was smiling slightly. "You're impossible. You know that? So you're okay with it?" "I'm not sure 'okay' is the right word," she said. "But I trust your judgment. Usually," she paused. "Just be careful, all right? I don't want you getting hurt because you believed in someone who wasn't ready." The next evening, Robert arrived at the restaurant early. He'd arranged for Thomas to meet him at 5, an hour before dinner service started. He'd also stopped by a thrift store that morning and picked up some clothes. Dress pants, a few button-down shirts, a belt. Nothing fancy, but clean and presentable. 5 o'clock came and went, then 5:15. Robert felt the familiar weight of doubt settling in his stomach. Maybe Linda had been right. Maybe Thomas wouldn't show. At 5:20, there was a knock at the back door. Robert opened it to find Thomas standing there, looking terrified. He'd cleaned up as best he could. His face was scrubbed, his beard trimmed shorter with what looked like scissors. His clothes were still the same worn ones from yesterday, but they'd been washed somehow. "I'm sorry I'm late," Thomas said immediately. "I had to walk from the shelter, and I got turned around, and—" "You here," Robert interrupted, relief flooding through him. "That's what matters. Come in." He showed Thomas to the small office in the back and handed him the bag of clothes. "These might not fit perfectly, but they should be close enough. There's a bathroom down the hall where you can change." Thomas took the bag like it was made of gold. "You didn't have to do this." "I know. Just change. We'll talk about the schedule while you do." 20 minutes later, Thomas emerged looking like a different person. The black dress pants were a little loose, but the belt helped. The white shirt was slightly big in the shoulders, but it was clean and pressed. He'd slicked his hair back with water. "You look good," Robert said, meaning it. Thomas tugged at the collar uncomfortably. "I feel like I'm wearing a costume. You'll get used to it." Robert handed him a glass of water. "Okay, here's how this works. Dinner service runs from 6 to 10, Tuesday through Saturday. I'm asking you to be here all 5 nights. You'll play during dinner, take breaks when you need to. I'll pay you $200 a week, plus dinner every night you work." Thomas's eyes widened. "That's too much. That's barely minimum wage for the hours," Robert said. "But it's what I can afford right now. If business picks up because of you, we'll talk about more." "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll show up on time," Robert replied. "That's all I'm asking." The first night was rough. Thomas's hands shook so badly during the first song that he hit several wrong notes. Robert could see him sweating, nervous, like he might bolt at any moment. A few customers looked up from their meals, curious but not particularly impressed. But as the evening went on, Thomas settled in. By the third song, his hands were steadier. By the fifth, he'd lost himself in the music again, the way he had the day before. People started to notice. Conversations got quieter. Forks paused halfway to mouths. By the end of the night, Robert knew it was going to work. The second night was better. Word had started to spread. 3 couples specifically mentioned they'd heard about the pianist when they made their reservations. Thomas played Beethoven, some Gershwin, a beautiful rendition of Clair de Lune that made Jenny tear up again. The third night, the restaurant was completely full for the first time in months. every table booked. People standing by the bar, waiting for seats. Thomas played for 3 straight hours, with only 2 short breaks. But the 4th night, Thomas didn't show up. Robert waited by the back door, checking his watch every few minutes. 6 o'clock came, then 6:30. The dinner rush started, tables filling up, and the corner with the piano sat empty and silent. Customers kept glancing at it, clearly disappointed. Robert felt his heart sink. This was it, the thing Linda had warned him about. Thomas had made it 3 days, and then fallen back into old patterns. He'd probably gotten drunk, or just decided it was too hard, or, at 7:15, the back door burst open. Thomas stumbled in, and Robert's heart sank further. He was disheveled, his new shirt half untucked, his hair a mess. But his eyes were clear. He wasn't drunk. "I'm sorry," Thomas gasped, out of breath. "I'm so sorry. I went to the shelter to get my stuff, and there was this kid there. Teenager, maybe 16. He was new, scared out of his mind. I couldn't leave him there alone. I had to make sure he knew where to get food, where was safe to sleep. I lost track of time." Robert studied his face, looking for the lie. But all he saw was genuine distress and exhaustion. "You okay to play?" he asked. Thomas nodded quickly. Yes, I can play." "Then go, quick." Thomas rushed to the bathroom to fix himself up, then practically ran to the piano. He sat down and immediately launched into something fast and energetic, like he was apologizing through the music. The customers who'd been checking their watches and looking annoyed suddenly perked up. Robert watched from the bar, arms crossed. His heart was still racing from the scare. But Thomas was here. That was something. The 5th night, Thomas showed up 15 minutes early. He'd brought his own sheet music, pages yellowed and worn, kept in a battered folder he'd apparently been carrying around for years. He organized them carefully on the piano's music stand before customers started arriving. That night he played better than ever. Requests started coming in. Could he play this? Could he play that? And somehow, he knew almost everything people asked for. Classical, jazz, even a few old standards that had people in their 70s smiling with nostalgia. After closing, Robert found Thomas carefully putting away his sheet music. "You made it through the week," he said. Thomas looked up, surprise on his face, like he couldn't quite believe it himself. "I did, didn't I? So what do you think? Want to keep going?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Yeah, I do. If you'll have me." Robert stuck out his hand. "Same deal. 200 a week, 5 nights, dinner included. But I'm going to ask you to do something else, too." Thomas shook his hand, looking wary. "What?" "There's a community center 3 blocks from here. They have A meetings every Monday and Wednesday night." Robert held up his hand before Thomas could protest. "I'm not saying you have to go, but I'm asking you to think about it. For yourself, not for me." Thomas's jaw tightened. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." "You weren't ready for this either," Robert pointed out. "But you did it anyway." That night, Robert went home and told Linda that Thomas had made it through the week. She smiled, genuinely pleased, but her eyes still held worry. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we see if 1 week can turn into 2, Robert said. "And then maybe 2 can turn into a month. And if it doesn't?" Robert thought about the past 5 nights. The music filling his restaurant, the way customers lingered just to listen, the tips Thomas was starting to get from grateful diners. But more than that, he thought about the way Thomas's hands had stopped shaking quite so much. The way he stood a little straighter. The way something that had been dead behind his eyes seemed to be flickering back to life. "Then at least we tried," Robert said. "But I think he's going to make it. I really do." 3 months passed like water flowing downstream. Some days were harder than others, but Thomas showed up every single night. Robert watched him transform slowly, like a plant that had been kept in darkness, finally getting sunlight. The Monday after that first week, Thomas had gone to his first AA meeting. He didn't tell Robert about it until 2 weeks later, mentioning it casually while tuning the piano before service. Robert had just nodded, not making a big deal of it, but inside he'd felt a surge of pride. By the second month, Casa Bella needed a reservation system. The phone rang constantly with people wanting to book tables specifically on nights when Thomas played. Food critics started showing up, writing reviews that mentioned the unexpected treasure of live classical piano music. One reviewer called Thomas's playing heartbreakingly beautiful. Robert had to hire another server just to keep up with the increased business. He'd also increased Thomas's pay to $300 a week, then $400. Thomas had protested, but Robert insisted. "You're the reason we're packed every night," he'd said simply. "You've earned it." With the steady income, Thomas had been able to move into a small efficiency apartment above a laundromat 6 blocks away. It wasn't much, just one room with a hot plate and a shared bathroom down the hall, but it was his. He kept it obsessively clean, almost like he was afraid it might disappear if he didn't take care of it. But the real change was harder to see. It was in the way Thomas's shoulders didn't hunch quite so much anymore, the way his hands barely shook at all these days, the way he'd started making small jokes with Jenny and the other staff, his rough voice occasionally producing actual laughter. Then came the Tuesday evening that changed everything again. It started like any other night. The restaurant filled up early, the usual mix of regulars and newcomers drawn by the music. Thomas played a beautiful set of Debussy pieces, then transitioned into some jazz standards. The dinner crowd hummed with conversation and the clink of silverware against plates. Around 8 o'clock, an elderly woman walked in alone. She was elegantly dressed, probably in her late 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a dark blue dress and carried herself with the kind of posture that spoke of old money and classical training. Vincent showed her to a small table near the piano. Robert noticed her because she didn't look at the menu. She just sat there, staring at Thomas with an intensity that made Robert uneasy. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, her face pale. Thomas was in the middle of a Chopin waltz, his eyes closed, completely absorbed in the music. He didn't notice her at all. When the piece ended, the woman stood up abruptly. Her chair scraped against the floor loudly enough that several people looked over. She walked directly toward the piano, moving fast for someone her age. Robert started forward, not sure what was happening, but sensing something was wrong. Or maybe not wrong, something big. The woman stopped right in front of the piano. Thomas opened his eyes, probably to check his sheet music, and found her standing there. He froze. They stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. The restaurant had gone quiet, everyone sensing the sudden tension in the air. Then the woman's face crumpled. "Tommy?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Thomas went completely white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His hands, which had been resting on the keys, started to shake violently. "Tommy, it's me," the woman said, tears streaming down her face now. "It's Helen, your sister." The words seemed to break something in Thomas. He stood up so fast, the piano bench scraped backward. For a second, Robert thought he might run. But then the woman took a step forward, and Thomas met her halfway. They collided in an embrace that made Robert's eyes burn. The woman was sobbing openly, her hands clutching the back of Thomas's shirt, like she was afraid he might vanish. Thomas had his face buried in her shoulder, his whole body shaking. "I thought you were dead," Helen kept saying through her tears. "I thought you were dead." I looked everywhere. Everywhere. The entire restaurant watched in stunned silence. Jenny had her hand over her mouth, tears running down her cheeks. Even Tony had come out of the kitchen and stood there watching, his eyes wet. Robert stayed back, leaving them space. This moment was too private, too sacred to interrupt. Finally, after what might have been 2 minutes or 10, they pulled apart. Both their faces were streaked with tears. Helen cupped Thomas's face in her hands, studying him like she was memorizing every line, every detail. "How?" Thomas finally managed to ask. "How did you find me?" Helen laughed, a sound caught between joy and grief. "Someone posted a video on the internet of you playing here. A young woman recorded it on her phone a few weeks ago. It went everywhere." She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, showed him the screen. 3 million views. "I saw it yesterday, and I couldn't believe. I thought maybe it was someone who just looked like you, but then I heard you play, and I knew. I just knew." Thomas took the phone, stared at the video of himself playing. His face showed complete bewilderment. 3 million people? "You were always brilliant," Helen said, touching his arm like she needed to confirm he was real. "Even after everything that happened, you never lost that." They moved to Helen's table, sitting across from each other, holding hands across the tablecloth, like they might lose each other again if they let go. Robert brought them coffee and water, and quietly told Vincent to make sure no one disturbed them. For the next 2 hours, they talked. Robert couldn't hear most of it, but he caught pieces. Helen had been searching for Thomas for 8 years, ever since she'd retired and had time to really look. She'd hired private investigators, contacted shelters, posted on missing persons websites. She'd found dead ends, false leads, and crushing disappointments. "I'd almost given up," she said at one point, loud enough for Robert to hear. "I thought I'd never see you again." Thomas told her about the last 12 years, though Robert could see how hard it was for him. Helen listened without judgment, just holding his hand tighter whenever his voice broke. Around 10 o'clock, as the restaurant was closing, they finally stood up. Helen turned to Robert, who was wiping down the bar. "You're the owner?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." She crossed to him and took both his hands in hers. "Thank you," she said, her voice fierce with emotion. "Thank you for giving my brother a chance when no one else would. Thank you for seeing him when the rest of the world looked away." Robert felt his throat tighten. He earned it. Every bit of it. "She's right, though," Thomas said, coming to stand beside his sister. His arm was around her shoulders, like he was still afraid she might disappear. "If you hadn't let me play that first day, if you'd done what anyone else would have done, and just sent me away." He couldn't finish the sentence. "You would have found your way," Robert said, though he wasn't sure that was true. "No," Thomas said firmly. "I wouldn't have. I was giving up. That day, walking in here, that was my last try. I decided if it didn't work, I was done trying." The words hung heavy in the air. Robert understood what he meant, what he'd really been saying. "But it did work," Helen said, squeezing her brother's hand. "And now you're coming home with me. I have a guest house that's been empty for 2 years. It's yours for as long as you want it." Thomas looked at Robert, panic crossing his face. "But the restaurant, I can't just—" "You can," Robert interrupted gently. "Your sister found you. That's a miracle. Don't worry about the restaurant." "But I want to keep playing," Thomas said quickly. "If you'll let me. Not every night, maybe. But I don't want to stop. This place, these people, you gave me my life back. I don't want to lose that." Robert smiled. "How about 3 nights a week? Tuesday, Friday, Saturday. We'll call you our featured performer." Thomas's face broke into a genuine smile, the first truly happy expression Robert had ever seen on him. Yeah, I'd like that." Helen insisted on taking a photo of the two of them together before they left. Thomas stood next to Robert in front of the piano, both of them looking slightly awkward, both of them smiling. As they walked toward the door, Thomas turned back one more time. "Robert, that day you asked me if I wanted to change. I told you I didn't know if I deserved to. I remember. I still don't know if I deserve it," Thomas said. "But I'm grateful anyway. For all of it." After they left, Robert stood alone in his empty restaurant. The tables were clean, the chairs put up, the lights dimmed. He walked over to the piano and sat down on the bench, looking at the keys his own fingers would never know how to play. He thought about the first day Thomas had walked in, desperate and hungry. He thought about the risk he'd taken, the doubt he'd felt, the fear that Linda had been right to worry. But mostly he thought about what his father had always told him. Back in those early days, washing dishes at Mr. Peterson's diner, we help people not because we know they'll succeed, but because everyone deserves the chance to try. Thomas had tried, and somehow, impossibly, beautifully, he'd found his way back. Robert stood up, turned off the last light, and locked the door. Tomorrow there would be more customers, more music, more life. But tonight there was just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, believing in someone was enough to help them believe in themselves. And that was worth everything.